Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining DLT today for this special discussion on helping you design and implement an effective application security awareness and training program for your agency. I'm James Hofsis, a cybersecurity solutions engineer at DLT. Before we dive into learning about AppSec awareness, I'd like to tell you about how DLT, as the premier government solutions aggregator, enables public sector customers to make smarter technology choices. We were the first company of its kind servicing the public sector, and we have more than 28 years of experience exclusively focused on the U.S. public sector, federal, state, local, and education. In that time, we've grown to over 300 employees, mostly located in the DC metro area. This enables us to maintain face-to-face relationships with our public sector customers, system integrators, channel partners, and our technology solution partners, such as Checkmarx. Recently, DLT became a wholly owned subsidiary of Tech Data. Aligning with Tech Data brings broader technology solution provider and partner relationships, financial strength, and strengthens our commitment to solutions aggregation in the public sector. Our extensive contract vehicle and channel partner portfolio provides our clients and channel partners access to more than 70 contract vehicles held in-house. Combined with our channel partner contract vehicles, we provide access to more than 120 contract vehicles. This infrastructure allows our government customers to buy technology the way they want to buy, from the partners they want to buy from, utilizing their preferred contract vehicles. Finally, we provide you with access to specialized technical capabilities across enterprise IT, enterprise hardware, enterprise software, and as-a-service models. I, as well as other DLT certified engineers, meet day-to-day agency needs through demos, solution labs, and certified confirmed stateside support, a unique U.S. citizen, U.S. soil managed service. As I said, our mission at DLT is to enable our public sector customers to make the most of the technology products and solutions available to you. As a cybersecurity practitioner, my goal is to help you find ways to reduce risk to your agency, including internal risks. Now, those risks may come from the people you hire, the hardware you install, or even the applications that you create. When it comes to developing applications securely, raising awareness of best practices can't be thought of as just another step in your process. Security awareness must be present in every step of your software development lifecycle. And joining me today to help us better understand the vital role security awareness plays in application development are two experts in the subject, Stephen Gates and Kurt Risley from Checkmarx. They're going to show us how, through the use of just-in-time training, ongoing communication, and fun engagement, you can cultivate a security-minded culture that empowers your developers to think and act securely in their day-to-day mission. Stephen and Kurt, welcome.
Hey, everybody.
Thanks, James.
Kurt, could you tell the audience a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Sure. Good day, everyone. My name is Kurt Risley. My focus at Checkmarx is mainly a global SME or subject matter expert around our code bashing solution, which is an AppSec awareness platform.
All right, thanks, Kurt. Stephen, could you share a little bit about yourself as well?
Yes, absolutely, James. So good day, everyone, and welcome. My name is Stephen Gates, and I bring more than 15 years of information security experience to my role at Checkmarx. I have an extensive hands-on background in the deployment and implementation of on-premise and cloud-based solutions. And I'm somewhat of a well-known writer, blogger, presenter, and published author. And I'm also very dedicated to conveying facts and figures and information that brings awareness to the cybersecurity issues all organizations face.
All right, great. Thanks, Stephen. Stephen, before we get started into the presentation, I think it'd be helpful if you start us off with a definition of DevSecOps in a nutshell, and then give us a high-level perspective of AppSec awareness and what that means for your customers' agencies.
Well, absolutely. I mean, today, obviously all agencies, organizations of both public and private sector want to increase the software developers' awareness of best practices and common pitfalls, especially from a security perspective, and leverage practical material with the steps required to accomplish this goal. Now, an AppSec awareness program should primarily target the entire development community but in addition to improving security for an entire organization, and it must be performed and tracked on a regular basis. Now, when we look at the slide here and we talk about the 6 steps to embed security into DevOps, and I think it all begins, and a lot of industry experts agree with this, is that first off, it begins with defining application security policies, right? And those policies, here at the top, obviously defined and drive how we automate and integrate application security testing technologies, into our SDLC pipelines. Then also, the whole idea around here is embedding security is that it also, is related to identifying vulnerabilities in the actual code that my developers are creating, correlating the scan results that, from the various technologies that I'm using to scan these different, scan these different software packages and programs, and then also about remediating vulnerabilities. And then finally is manage and monitor an AppSec program. And so this becomes a continuous cycle, right? And it begins at define and eventually ends back up with managing and monitoring your AppSec program and an AppSec awareness program, which again helps you define, the actual AppSec security policies. So, today there's really no doubt that the world relies heavily on software, and simply put, software is everywhere. Today, more than ever before, software must equal security. However, the real question that needs to be asked is, what is the primary cause of software defects that lead to exploitable vulnerabilities? Now, Kurt, what are your thoughts on the origin of vulnerabilities?
That's a good question. What I've seen, almost all the research that maybe you read or hear about, into those areas is basically around the lack of secure coding education, also training, awareness, and just the skills for the developer. In fact, I think there's a statistic out there, 70% of developers indicate they lack the necessary training to adequately secure the software they develop. And as you can see on the screen here, there's plenty of developers out there. And as we'll talk about, there's softwares in every organization or in every agency or department. 90% of security incidents result from defects in the software designer code. So we're really talking about getting to the root of helping these developers. You see 21% of data breaches are the result of software vulnerabilities, as I just mentioned. And 1 in 3 of the newly scanned applications had SQL injections. So we're still seeing a lot of vulnerabilities in these applications. We're trying to help the developer learn more about security in addition to their day-to-day job. And I think the key one here, just the ratio of developers to application security experts is pretty significant. It's 100 to 1. So really the best place to start is the beginning, as I mentioned. So you hear terms shift left, you hear other ways of people talking about it, but we really need to focus on the developers themselves, However, the reality is that today's developers, they have other priorities like deadlines, functional bugs versus vulnerabilities, new languages. I could go on and on. Expansion of software utilization, increasing projects. I mean, they're extremely busy.
Kurt, I couldn't agree with you more. We can see there's many challenges that all organizations face. So let's shift gears a little and discuss AppSec programs in more detail. So Kurt, how does your conversation typically start with an organization around an AppSec awareness program?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. Typically, I ask them a very basic question, and that is, do you currently have an AppSec awareness program in place for your developers? Not just a security awareness, but an AppSec awareness program for your developers. And, I'll get typically 2 or 3 of the same type of responses. Most customers that I speak with either have an informal program, where the developer's required to take a certain amount of training, while others just don't even have anything in place, but really have the desire to take it to the next level. So it's nearly the same, whoever I speak with. We'll get into this a little bit more, but from a mandatory perspective, there's a lot of agencies out there that have mandatory compliance requirements. PCI is one that comes to mind, and we could probably list a few other ones, but their existing program is really not well thought out, and to even begin to adequately address their compliance mandates, as you see on the slide here, AppSec awareness is really no longer an option. I'll have conversations with 10 customers, let's say in a week, and 8 of those are basically starving to really put a formal program in. Everybody realizes the importance of it and what needs to be done. They just don't know how to do it. And I think we'll talk about that in more detail. But, we can talk right here. We all know that there are sometimes some cultural gaps or some silos within organizations, but what putting an AppSec awareness program in place really does help bridge that gap between security and the developers. And we're seeing that gap disappear or dissipate more and more every time I talk to organizations. Let's see here. As I said, I'm not going to go through every single slide here, but let's take a look at something that came to mind here. I mean, in the context of an official awareness program, as I mentioned, a lot of customers ask, I would love to do this. I have no idea where to get started. How do I get my developers engaged where it's fun, it's gamified, or, they're not looking at the typical boring videos that they do and roll their eyes when they hear about training. To be honest, answering these questions on a daily basis where I've been spending a lot of my time. The organization I work with, Checkmarks, we actually provide an AppSec awareness platform. There are many other types of education solutions that the developer could benefit from. So our conversation today is more focused around best practice and how do we define, communicate, engage, and in addition to delivering a formal program, regardless of the solution.
Well, Kurt, that's pretty interesting. So let's talk a little more about that in detail. What does a workable and proven AppSec awareness program actually look like? And, how do you recommend kickstarting one?
No, it's a good question. I kind of like to make it simple and break it down to 4 key areas. Any agency should probably, write these down or think about these, but the key thing here is commitment from leadership, executive sponsorship, however you want to word it. I just believe that that's critical. If we are messaging it culturally throughout the organization, top down, that goes a long way. So, I think that there's 4 areas that need to be addressed to obtaining that key stakeholder buy-in. You try to roll something like this out, you want to get buy-in. The audience is typically, what's in it for me, which is fine, but you need to communicate with your executive team about the what, the why, how of an AppSec awareness program, typically the goals and the benefits of the program. That's a first start. Number 2 probably would be, addressing the question from your executives concerning, as I said, what's in it for me. This helps strengthen ties between developers and security teams. It reduces software risk for the organization or the agency. This helps demonstrate that you're a security-driven organization to your customers, which is important to all organizations. I think it would resonate with a lot of people that whoever's listening to this, your customers are now starting to require validation or to know that your developers are going through security training and that the code and the programs and the applications that they're purchasing have gone through certain certifications. Message your development managers team. So now we've talked to the executive team. Now let's get to the development managers, the development VPs, directors, whatever it may be, and get their buy-in as well. And it's the same thing, kind of typically talking about the goals and the benefit of the program and kind of get some of their perspective or feedback. What's working, what's not, here's how we should go about this. Have you thought of this? And I think the last thing is getting the development managers, directors, VPs buy-in and identifying some specific KPIs that need to be addressed, or really to get a baseline for rolling out an AppSec awareness program. What I convey to customers is, some things to think about, or goals to think about, is doing this is going to help reduce the amount of costly security bugs delaying software delivery and deployment. Okay, it also puts security in the foreground as a software development, and it incorporates security as a best coding practice. So it's a pride thing as well. Definitely improves collaboration between the security team and the developers. And if everybody's on the same page and they have the same goal that you're achieving for, you usually see some very good collaboration. And it provides an easy way to identify and measure security skills among new hires and candidates as well. So let's take a look at we talked about the traditional training approach and its disadvantages, we're about to here. Let me start that one over. All right, so let's just talk about the disadvantages of a traditional training program and what we see out there. We talked about the collaboration and everything, but one of the things that you definitely see is that check the box mentality. We need to move away from that. We're definitely not conveying a cultural approach on security if we're just checking the box. We definitely don't want the training to be lengthy and time consuming. It definitely needs to be in context or relevant in the current day and age, I guess is the best way to put it. We see videos typically can be very boring. You might, as a developer, I might just click on the play button, go get a cup of coffee and come back and maybe answer the quiz. That's really not what we're trying to do here. And we'll talk more about that as we move forward. Let's go kind of take a look at the do's. The next slide here. Obviously, we're talking about a program. So this would be an annual approach, ongoing versus one-off. We'll talk about it in detail here, and I might even get an opportunity to show you what I'm talking about. But we certainly, if we've gotten buy-in from the leadership and from management, how about we get a baseline? How about we measure and we define some key performance indicators that we can measure on and actually demonstrate value and improvement through this program? Because ultimately, an AppSec awareness program is going to help the organization reduce risk. But instead of like those long, boring videos that I just mentioned, how about something that's a little bit more interactive? It's very short, bite-size. We can go completely off topic on an individual's retention when they go through a lesson or a video or a day class or a week class. So we're finding that from an industry point of view, just having those small, succinct, just-in-time type lessons are resonating a lot more and definitely interactive. Reaching the developer at the right place. I think the best way to explain that is, wouldn't it be nice if I was actually looking at my code and a vulnerability, and I'm not clear what cross-site scripting is, SQL injection, and I could transition into a very quick interactive lesson, retain probably 90 to 100% of that, toggle back to my IDE and make the appropriate changes, and then rerun a scan if that's the case, or actually remediate that code. And then, I think we could probably move on to the next slide.
That's great advice, Kurt. Now that even I've heard this before from prospects, what is the best way to organize your approach to an AppSec awareness solution? So can you speak to that topic next?
Sure. So, talking about organizational structure, we kind of put it down in simple terms into 4 areas. Rolling this out, we need to take a step back, look at the organization, how it's structured, what makes the most sense. I have found that teams development teams. That could be by geography. It could be by a business unit, a product line, an application, even a specific language. So from a rollout perspective, structuring it with teams, I think makes the most sense. And then the second one would be launching it. We talked a little bit about it, but really communicating with the developers the specifics of the rollout. Clearly explain the goals and objections and why we're doing this, but let them know this is fun. It's going to be fun. It's going to be productive, and it's not going to be very time consuming. And I think one of the key things when doing this is really assessing throughout the entire program. What I mean by that is, wouldn't it be nice if you actually defined or got a baseline at the beginning of your program? So then throughout the training, we can assess and see that the type of training that we're conducting is helping, is being received well, and that the developers can see they're improving, and then we can actually measure that and demonstrate that back to leadership, to the board. Because ultimately, I continue to say it, but these agencies and departments, our primary goal is to reduce risk within those agencies. And, we talk about takeaway or ROI. It really is kind of what I just said there is, once we go through this, let's repeat and rinse, and let's make sure that we're hitting these KPIs that are important for us. And if we're not, let's adjust and re-look at how we want to do this, and then measure that again.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more on that, Kurt, because you spoke to rolling it. How do you roll it out? Utilizing teams, right? Launching it is really about, communicating, right, with my developers and making sure that everybody certainly understands the goals and objectives, and then also assess, get a baseline at the beginning of your program. And I think that's very, very important to, the KPIs, the key performance indicators, and how well the ROI is working for this type of program. So 100% agree with you. That makes a great deal of sense. So then what should happen next?
Okay, so it's a good question. I basically would say being proactive, okay? And how do you go about doing that? You see train. I mean, really, we want to conduct some focused training for a certain period of time, on a regular basis. I have so many customers that I talk to that, maybe they'll run a little learning track for 1 month to half the developers in the organization or by geography. And then as you can see the next line, after I run that training, how about a little friendly competition? So we go through maybe a challenge, or, we incent them and say we have a leaderboard, and the top 3, you get front row parking for the month, or a trophy, or you guys get where I'm going with it. It's culturally, you can figure out the best way to incent your developers, but I don't think I've run into too many customers where a developer doesn't have that, or have a desire for that friendly competition. And then we go right back to what we're talking about. Let's assess. How well did that go? How well was it received? Are we seeing improvement based on our code? It's not showing as many vulnerabilities, so kind of a reduction in vulnerabilities. And then, if it kind of goes back to what I said, hey, this is working really well. There's good collaboration between everyone. But I do see where we have a gap here, or something's not working well. It's kind of, let's take a look at that. And I strongly recommend, let's just open it up and have a collaborative discussion of, this isn't working, how can we improve on it? Let's address it head on. And then essentially rinse and repeat. I mean, if it's working, don't fix it. If something's broke, just go ahead and address that. But yeah, that would be kind of a high level approach from my point of view.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, Kurt. Now let's talk a little bit about governance, risk, and compliance. When we think about AppSec awareness programs, do you feel that GRC comes into play, and what are you observing from GRC teams within these organizations, agencies, et cetera, today?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and I'm happy to talk about that. I actually, when I am at an agency or organization, wherever it may be, when compliance or governance is involved, I see better success. And I actually am seeing that compliance is a major driver in these programs. And engaging that compliance organization, typically they're doing other types of training or have other requirements where they have a better pulse on the culture. They're able to help give good advice on how to roll this out or the best manner of doing it. But I'm a strong believer in the compliance group. I think they're a key component. We do see agencies that might be handling an AppSec awareness program kind of siloed on their own, and those still can be very effective. But to embrace the entire dev org globally or throughout all the departments within an agency, the compliance group typically has a good idea, the best way to do that efficiently. So, I mean, a good example. Sorry, I was just thinking PCI is a big one. You see the slide here. I get a lot of customers that actually have to provide to auditors proof that the developers are going through training. And you can actually see it here, 6.5b. Examine training records of training to verify that software developers receive up-to-date training on secure coding. I probably see it 5 out of 10 customers where that's critical, and the auditors are looking for proof of that. So having an AppSec awareness program in place certainly meets that PCI requirement for an agency.
Yeah, I mean, because you can see it right here where, we see the word train or training is mentioned 38 times in PCI DSS alone. And, I've worked in the world of PCI for many, many years, and realizing it's a standard. It's not an option, right? If you don't pass your audits, you're not processing transactions. It's very simple. And the other thing that's really interesting is that when you look at from 651, 6.5.1 to 6.5.10, it actually lists the high priority software vulnerabilities, right? And you'll see terms inside of there, SQL injection, cross-site scripting, the same thing that you hear all over. And it also even mentions OWASP and SANS and CERT. One thing we can all learn here is that PCI DSS, many of the other, regulatory requirements and standards out there, are very interesting. They talk about training. They talk about the requirements. Now, being an advocate of and a contributor to OWASP top 10 projects, let's take a look at some of the OWASP latest top 10. For example, and this is for web application security here on my top left, and you will see that the OWASP top 10 2013, and then again the OWASP top 10 2017. So OWASP, they come out with these lists about every 3 to 4 years. And if you notice at the very top, A1 injection, which is primarily related to SQL database injections, you'll notice it's at the top of the list in 2013, top of the list in 2017.
Yeah.
So that tells us that there is a repetition that is going on. And you see broken authentication, cross-site scripting, security misconfiguration. Although they're kind of flipped around a little bit, many of them are very similar year after year after year. Now, when we go over to the OWASP API security top 10, right? So this just came out. My organization Checkmarks, helped back this OWASP top 10 security list. And one of our researchers spearheaded, and I was actually a contributor to this. You notice down here on API number 8, injection. We see that the same problems have now moved over into the world of APIs. And then also we can see here on the mobile risk side of the house, although it doesn't really call out injection, we all know that mobile apps are very much API driven. And so many of the API vulnerabilities of these risks can actually become become reality in the world of mobile app development as well. And so, I think it's very interesting that how do you address these vulnerabilities, these poor coding practices, these common pitfalls that have been around year over year over year? And I think it begs to ask the question, why do we continue to make the same mistakes? Why do developers continue to, create these vulnerabilities, which obviously creates risks for agencies, departments, organizations, etc. So I think it's a very interesting topic, and really tying this to PCI DSS, because PCI DSS obviously calls out OAuth's top 10s. Now, one thing I also, do you have some comments on that, Kurt?
No, that's okay. Just agreeing with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we can all agree. And so when we look at the common coding errors and pitfalls, today's developers need to be keenly aware of these issues, SQL injection, XXE injection, command injection, session fixation, reflected cross-site scripting, persistent cross-site script. The list goes on and on and on and on. And I think the real key here is that in order to address these vulnerabilities and these coding errors, these common pitfalls, I think AppSec awareness is key. I think AppSec awareness and developer training specific to these vulnerabilities is also key. Now, I know that I think we've got some time here for an actual short demonstration. So, Kurt, are you prepared to do like a short demo? Maybe we can key in on one of these, one of these issues, these coding errors and pitfalls. Are you prepared to do that now?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, you bring a good point up, and it really is just having that in the forefront of the developer. You may do a great job, you may be an amazing developer, but just sometimes you don't think about that. Let's see here. Let me share my screen here. Hold on a second. I don't know if I need control, or I don't see a notification here. There we go. Okay, give me a second here. I'm going to, and let me just validate, are you guys able to see my browser?
Yes, we can now.
Okay.
So before we get started,
go ahead.
Before we get started, explain to the audience what we're seeing. What is this?
Okay. So really what this is, and we talked earlier about it, is providing, this is a basic interactive, fun type of lesson, which is kind of a role play. This is something that we do here, or I show this to customers all the time, but it's a quick 5 to 8 minute lesson. And instead of somebody clicking on a video, what we do is we've defined kind of, okay, let's take a look at SQL injection. And even before I go into it, if you recall me talking about the developer's very busy. They have all kinds of things to do during the day. Obviously, remediating vulnerabilities may be part of that within their code. How can I do this the most efficiently way to help them understand how not to do it, as well as, maybe avoid that in the future? So we believe with a very short and concise type lesson that it is retained, almost all of it is retained, and then they can quickly go back into their IDE, maybe remediate that code set there and be done. So what you're looking at here is basically a SQL injection lesson. And it says interactive tutorial here. We basically do a role play where we have Alice, our hero, and Bob, our bad guy. And the developer then can just click on this and it says, let's play. So what the developer sees here is a number of steps on the left. They have a nice narrative that kind of explains, here's where we are. We're going to talk about SQL injection. And you can see that the developer has a front end here. And it says, I won't read everything verbatim, but I'll kind of go through this fairly slow. It'll only take a few minutes anyway. But one of the things the developers really like is to see the back end and what's going on at the back end. So this live log is very helpful. So now we've kind of set up an interactive environment here, and now we're setting up a little situation here where Alice is trying to log into the application. So I, as the developer, actually have to interact with this lesson. So I'm putting alice@bank.com. It kind of tells me what I need to put in here. So I enter this information over here, and it says, now watch what happens in the live log pane when Alice, attempts to do this. So now we're seeing some statements back here. As you can see, Alice's password doesn't seem to work. So we're saying, well, let's try something different then. So I have to put in alice@bank.com. And now we want to do an Alice123 with a single quote. Now, if we enter that, now we basically start seeing some different things happen here. This certainly resonates with the developer, and we can see that there is an actual error, HTTP 500 internal server error. So if we look at the live log pane, you see where the details are on that. We can read the error log. The developer can kind of see what's going on here. They can take as much time as they want, but it tells me to go back to the login. Now as you can see, I'm already halfway done with this lesson, okay? You've kind of set the stage, you've demonstrated how something happened. It says, now let's try to understand why that error occurred. So let's take a look at how we're doing authentication here. And so what the developer will receive here is kind of a little bit of a narrative, and I won't go through these in great detail, but the developer then can go, okay, that makes sense. And you see how we're highlighting that line and we're talking about that line of code. And then we're talking about the string variable here and more details on that. And essentially we kind of summarize that and say, does this make sense to you? The developer can say, yeah, it does, or we can play it again. So they could spend a fair amount of time in here if they want, but we're going to now, let's understand why this error occurred. So I'm going to click next, and we're going to talk about building that SQL query. So if I click play, we make it extremely clear for the developer. Let's comment all the other lines out, and let's focus right on that line 4 there. And once again, we kind of go through and talk to the developer. Now that we've simplified this, our authentication logic code. So let's analyze the SQL query generated by Trade Portal. So what we're going to do here now is they want me to walk through and do a couple different passwords. So I'll do a quote there. Then we get to a point where here we're noticing that injecting characters are interpreted through the, basically we're kind of identifying SQL injection here. Any developer knows that this statement here, 1 = 1, is basically a true statement. So we're trying to inject things in here, and we're seeing that it's actually allowing it, okay? I have only 2 steps left, and you can see, it says, as you can see, the authentication method was bypassed. But why was that possible? So we just kind of walk through that. We talk about the statement both being syntactically valid, and that 1 = 1 always returns a true value. That's how we were able to do this. So the developer gets to walk through this, they get to interact with it, and now we actually kind of walk through some more information here. And I want to be careful not to just bore everybody with it, but it's just very helpful information for the developer. I think we've only been doing this for maybe 2.5 minutes, and you can see I'm at the very end. But the key thing here is, okay, we've demonstrated a scenario. We've talked about how it happens. But now, how about giving me some advice or some guidance? So we give some remediation guidance here. Our recommendation is prepared statements. Now, if I don't understand what prepared statements are, I get a little narrative here. But if I click play, we'll actually go in here and provide our recommendation. So this is where I'm talking about a developer gets a couple JIRA tickets, or and they have some vulnerabilities within their code. They're not clear on it. They just went through a lesson here. They could easily, while they're looking at this, pause it, toggle over to their IDE, make the appropriate changes, and then maybe rerun that through a scan if that's what it went through. So, to summarize, the point I'm making here is was very quick, and it doesn't take a lot of the developers' time. It was interactive. I got to see how I would remediate this, and I could actually take those into play. Oh, wow, and there's even a little quiz here. I can do this. And that basically is a lesson in a nutshell. We get some, okay, let's summarize what we've learned. Down here, we also can show additional content. Maybe the developers have a internal Confluence site or a wiki page, or, hey, we just talked about the SQL injection last week. I definitely want to share this with somebody, and I can provide feedback. I think we have a little bit of time here. I wanted to kind of reiterate some of the things that I was talking about earlier. And what I'm showing you here is our AppSec awareness platform. And I'm not going to go in and do some sort of a demo here, but you heard me talking about assessments, getting a baseline. This just kind of gives you more of a visual of what I was talking about as far as an organization could throw out an assessment to the entire dev org. And the results they get back, they can actually see, this is an example. We're pretty strong here in this area. We do have some areas that need improvement. Here's a good example of where I could actually provide some focus training. Let's call it a learning path. So when we talk about doing this on an annual basis, there's a lot of ways to go about it. But to get that initial assessment out or baseline is, I think, very critical. And then you can actually use that to demonstrate value and that this program is effective, it's working. We talked about communication. There's a capability right here in the platform where I can send out nicely formatted emails. Hey, everybody, let's have fun. We're going to do a friendly challenge next month. I hope you all want to join us. The winner gets a free iPad. There are so many different things that people have done, or give away trophies or T-shirts, but just make it fun. What I do also see is most agencies, departments will have kind of an internal annual conference, let's say a cybersecurity conference. This also helps with the platform or the ability with an AppSec awareness program to show that off, maybe have a tournament during that time, or an opportunity to have exposure to what you guys are doing and culturally how we're addressing security throughout the organization from a development point of view. I'll go ahead and stop sharing here. Unless there's things that you can think about. I didn't want to go through a demo, but this basically is just showing how I can monitor and manage this program and see real time how things are going and how the developers are going through the courses and if we're seeing any glitches. So I just kind of wanted to give you a visual of what we've been talking about for the last half or so hour.
Well, Kurt, before we go back to the slides, Kurt, it's pretty interesting because you showed us like two parts of this. One of them would be from the developer's perspective, right? And you can imagine them working in their IDE, and they do an application security scan of the code. It comes back with, hey, you got a vulnerability on this line of code, and being able to jump immediately to a lesson, go through the lesson, and then go back and fix your code. You could see that's called real-time training, right? It's right when it's needed the most. And I feel that it's, it can be somewhat fun too, the way you showed exactly how that works. But I think there's another piece of this, which is really for the AppSec management side, right? So you can sort of track your developers, assess your program. You can provide those key performance indicators back to the management team, back to your GRC groups, and also, basically provide that feedback channel, right? And that, hey, we're getting better over time, things are getting better, et cetera. So pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, well, think about it. As you mentioned, as a developer, I'm extremely busy. That only took me a few minutes. Just think about the amount of time you're saving within an agency for the developer to be more productive. So that's all I have.
Excellent. So I think we just got a few more minutes left before we start to address some of the questions that have been coming in over the course of the webinar. So let's talk about, let's talk about security and DevOps one more time, right? Because I'm a huge advocate of how to put security into DevOps. And, it really begins with organizations developing strong AppSec policies, right? Because remember that circle I began with in the beginning of this webinar, that, define is at the top. And so defining your policies drives everything else with adding security in the DevOps. And really, from your AppSec policies, it's all about what are the acceptable and non-acceptable risks, application, what you're willing to accept, because applications are always going to have vulnerabilities. And AppSec policy also serves as a pseudo contract between AppSec and developers, right? So that both fully understand what's expected of them in terms of vulnerabilities. Also, it defines what vulnerabilities should be remediated first, right? Do I deal with the 0-day vulnerabilities first? Do I deal with my critical ones? Do I deal with my longer term ones? I think that policy drives this. And then, a policy is also very tightly associated with organizations that are trying to add security into DevOps. Now, I'm not a big fan of the, three-term acronym DevSecOps, because I believe that security should be just, basically expected inside of DevOps. But, I think that it's important that we address this and highlight this, is that your policies are also used to track your AppSec KPIs, right? And so when you say, hey, we've got to get better, this is what we're trying to do, this is what we're trying to improve, I think that circular slide at the very beginning of this presentation hopefully will make a little bit more sense to the listening audience. Now, there's another thing I like to call out before we head to questions. I know we got some time for questions. So why manage and monitor your KPIs? And first off, right, it's all about, allows you to see over time that the amount of vulnerabilities is decreasing, right? And when you looked at, when you were showing the screens inside of the code bashing platform from the AppSec manager's point of view, I think that's where that would be highlighted. Hey, where the vulnerabilities, the amount of vulnerabilities are decreasing over time. And then the rate of new vulnerabilities also needs to decrease as well. And if you're not tracking this, or say you're tracking this with some sort of spreadsheet, how in the world would you ever know if the rate of vulnerabilities was actually decreasing? And then the frequency of severe vulnerabilities must be decreasing as well. And I really feel that, when we're managing and monitoring your KPIs, it measures if your security program, your AppSec awareness program is effective. It highlights what needs improvement, highlights what doesn't. If it's not broke, don't fix it. But if it is broke, address it as fast as possible. And then I also feel that it determines if your developers need more incentives, need more, awareness, need more training. And I could see, and I hope everybody in the listening audience agrees, these are very, very tightly associated with each other, right? When we're talking about, the KPIs, managing and monitoring, starting with policies, basically doing your AppSec testing, dealing with the correlation, addressing your vulnerabilities, and it becomes very, very circular in nature. So I think we've got some time for some questions. And so, James, I'm now going to pass it back over to you to ask the questions that have been coming in throughout today's webinar.
Okay, great, Kurt. Here's the first question. Could you briefly sum up the key DevSecOps best practices and tell us how a training and awareness program like yours can help customers implement them?
That's a good question. Obviously we've been talking around the AppSec awareness program. Summing it up, we talked about culturally getting executive buy-in for this, and obviously communicating this throughout the organization, I think would be some key points there. Having a platform to be able to manage kind of what Stephen was just saying. All right, let's get a baseline, let's measure, let's define some KPIs. So, you probably do need some sort of a platform to kind of best manage an AppSec awareness program. And then, you heard me talk about making this on an annual basis. It could be sprints where we have a little focused SQL injection event for the next month and then a friendly competition or a tournament. But really make it fun. So that's probably how I would sum it up. I don't know, Stephen, if you want to add anything, but.
Well, I think we did a pretty good job of covering really, how to add security into DevOps. And, AppSec awareness is a key component, policy creation, another key component to organizations, achieving that DevSecOps.
Okay, great. Second question is, how can an AppSec awareness program enhance unity between security staff and developers? I think that's a really important question, an important point, because too many times we see security and operational staff or development staff appear to be kind of at odds with each other. A lot of times developers or others see security as kind of slowing them down or bottlenecking them. So if you could talk about how this program or a program like this would enhance unity and make it a better working relationship between them, that'd be great.
Well, yeah, it's a good point. Obviously, the reality is, we talked about it earlier, but you need to kind of look at the culture, and I go right back to what I think is critical is leadership buy-in on this. This needs to be almost as important as a mission statement for your agency or your department, where security is not an option. We embrace it. We believe in doing it right, and we are not going to be one of those agencies or departments that get breached. And I know sometimes that's hard to do, but I really believe it comes back from a cultural point of view. And when you get that executive sponsorship and you bring in all the stakeholders, so those stakeholders are going to be the developers and security, you're all going to be shooting for the same goal. Make it a win-win for everybody. Having those goals, you're removing any obstacles that you might have had in the past culturally. But, that would be the best way for those two entities to kind of bond or merge together on the same objective and goal.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that, Kurt.
Okay, great. Now the next question actually deals specifically with coding. They say a lot of our apps use a great deal of open source code. How can we ensure that code is safe and secure?
Well, I could certainly take that one, Kurt.
Well, do.
If you want me to take that one, do you want? Maybe we could do a
Go ahead.
joint answer here. When we're talking about open source, right? There's technologies out there today that are called software composition analysis technology, and today they're becoming a must. Statistics, some of the analysts are saying, 70%, 80% of code today has open source components in it, right? Libraries and components, et cetera. And in order for somebody to really move on that road to DevSecOps, understanding that open source is going to be embedded in all of these various, applications, et cetera, there has to be a way of identifying, number one, the open source components, managing the licenses, managing the versions, managing your risk, managing your technical debt. And so I think 100% in agreement today is that software composition analysis tools are imperative to be able to manage and effectively mitigate the risk of open source is certainly required. I mean, Kurt, what are your thoughts on that?
I'm in 100% agreement. Yeah.
Any more?
Great. Go ahead.
No, I was going to ask. Any more questions?
Yeah. So somebody asked, what models are available for AppSec awareness and training? For example, on-premise, cloud-based, hybrid cloud, et cetera.
It's a good question. I would say it's a combination of all of those. I think what I see out there are more of a cloud-based solution, a SaaS offering, very low maintenance. You get an opportunity for that specific vendor to continue to add content. There are some on-prem I'm seeing more of the on-prem stuff is more video-based and maybe not as effective, but obviously I've seen what's working in this day and age. So mainly probably cloud approach, but it could be all three.
Do you offer a no-cost trial or evaluation of your solution? And if so, what capabilities or services are offered with it?
Excellent question. So we do. We actually are running a 45-day free trial, which provides you the entire production environment. So, you saw me go through a lesson. You would have access to the entire catalog, a plethora of languages from beginning to advanced. But then you also have the platform. You have the ability to do those assessments or communicate. So there's no a la carte to it. It's all in one. But we are offering that for customers and up to 100 developers. So you could, I'm almost on the phone every day helping customers understand the best way to roll this out, kind of what we talked about today. But we are offering, Checkmarx has our code bashing offering for 45 days up to 100 users. It's a full platform.
Yeah, because Kurt, I've even heard where there's some higher ed organizations that are kind of taking advantage of this. Would you like to comment on that at all?
Yeah, it's actually an area that puts a smile on my face. I think it's very important. The reality is there are more developers out there than security experts. We already talked about that. How about we really shift left and we help the universities and incorporate some of this content that we're talking about in a cybersecurity curriculum. We have a number of universities that we provide this to them so that the developers get exposure. It's simple. It makes a point. It's something that, if there's an interest out there, but it's an area that's near and dear to my heart as far as really, if we're going to shift left, let's focus on the students, because I think the reality is that the developer is going to, as time moves on, have a mentality of security when they code. It's going to be that there's not enough security experts out there to manage it. I think that role, and there'll still be a role for that, but I think that the developer is going to have more of a security mentality.
Yeah, because we've seen the statistics or heard them that 80%, 70% of the developers don't feel confident in the code that they're creating, don't feel confident in the security, right, of the actual code that they're writing. And I think it would make 100% to actually bring these types of programs into higher ed, so that as these developers are graduating, they've got better background in AppSec awareness, and I think it's just good for the industry as a whole.
I agree. I mean, you're starting to see it more and more. We could certainly accelerate that, but it'll take its natural course. But I agree with you as well.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Kurt. Thanks, Stephen, for today's session. This has been really informative. You've given some folks, anybody who's thinking about DevSecOps and helping make that better and more secure, making their developers, better developers that are focused on security. You've given some really good tips and best practices. So I want to thank both of you for participating today. Thank everybody who joined us to listen in. Thanks for your questions. If you do have an interest in working on developing an AppSec awareness and training program, please reach out to us here at DLT. We'd be happy to connect you with some folks like Stephen and Kurt who can help make that happen for you. We're going to close here. So thanks everyone again, and take care.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, take care, everybody.